The time has come for Americans and Christians to stop making peace with evil. There's a problem in our government, and that is our government has been infiltrated by atheists, non-Christians, and even Satanists on multiple occasions. But especially today, it seems like the number of Christians in our government is dwindling. Scarce few Christians remain, and even fewer are willing to champion a Christian morality, a Christian philosophy, the sort of Christian beliefs that were present when we created our country. There are no more Christians in government, and that needs to change. When you think about it, Christianity is the heart and soul of the United States. Whether you believe in Christianity or not, you have an obligation to be honest with yourself and to think about history in an honest way. The founding fathers, when they came to the United States and when they came to the new continent and founded what would become the United States, what they were seeking was religious freedom. And that has become one of the biggest, most misconstrued issues of the 21st century. One of the problems in the United States is the growing acceptance of different ways of thinking. Why does that matter? At their core, every person has a worldview. Every person has a philosophy. And that worldview informs what they believe is right and wrong. It determines how they interact with other people. It guides them in making decisions, in valuing things, in building. So when we have a country full of people that believe and value different things, we call that diversity. And the lie has been that diversity is strength. But it makes no sense when you think about it. Diversity is not strength. Diversity is disorder. Diversity is chaos. Does that mean that we should get rid of everyone who believes differently? No. But that means that when we have so much diversity, eventually there are going to be disagreements. If two people believe things that are incompatible and can't be reconciled, then at some point that conflict will come to a head. When those people are just everyday people like you and I, it doesn't matter too much. But when one of those people begins running for office, or when they find themselves in a position of power, do you believe that they will not choose to exact or to enforce their perspective upon you? Of course they will. That's how politics works. So on the one hand, the United States is very tolerant, very accepting of different perspectives, different beliefs. There's a lot of freedom for you to believe and do as you like in the United States, but there must be one law of the land, one basic, fundamental set of beliefs that governs everything else. You can come to the United States and believe a different faith. You can be Muslim, you can be Hindu, you could be a Sikh, you could be a Buddhist, you could be Jewish, you could be Christian, you could be Protestant, you could be Catholic. As long as your beliefs don't cause you to violate the law, then there's no problem. But when you wish to change the law, you begin running into issues. In 1976, I believe it was, I won't date it, but in the 1970s, when the decision was made to allow for abortion in the United States, there was a fundamental decision made that a woman's right to choose whether she wanted to be pregnant or not overruled the life inside her. The calculus was that her life had more value than the life that she was creating, and that is incompatible with Christianity. But at that point, the decisions were made by a Supreme Court that had been infiltrated by those with a different worldview, not a Christian worldview, but a secular, humanist worldview. When worldviews begin to collide with one another, as we've seen over the past 10 years, since 2016, they don't really stop. Eventually, you get to the point where you are at a complete impasse. There are people who want one thing, people who want another thing, and it seems like violence is the only answer. At least it has been in most countries. Civil wars happen because of that very fact. The Armenian genocide happened because Christians and Muslims at some point could no longer live in peace with one another. And regardless of which side begins the violence, the fact is that philosophies are sometimes incompatible with one another. What does that mean for the United States? What does that mean for nationalism? The nationalist perspective, the perspective which prioritizes the history and the tradition of the United States, must begin by acknowledging the foundations of the United States. The Puritans and the early Americans who came to the continent looking for religious freedom were not looking for a place where Hindus, Muslims, and Buddhists could all live together with Christians and get along. They were looking for the freedom to practice Christianity without the Church of England being involved, without a political dynamic that would make them enemies of the state for choosing to practice Christianity as they saw fit. Now, in their foresight, they laid a foundation that was sufficiently broad and welcoming enough that there was room for other religions. But even in other places around the world, this isn't the case. If you visit Saudi Arabia, you are expected to observe all the laws of Islam. When you get off a plane in Saudi Arabia and you realize that you are being held to that standard, no one is really surprised when people are arrested for drugs. Recently, one of the headlines before being gobbled up by the Epstein files was that Saudi Arabia had executed, I believe, 20 prisoners for what in the United States would be minor drug possessions. A few of them were moving drugs. A few of them were just had possession of drugs. They had a small amount on them. But about 20 of them were executed because the laws in Saudi Arabia are so strict that there is no tolerance for that. Hi there. This is me from the future. I'm here to tell you that my numbers were actually way off. A report by Amnesty International says that between January 2014 and June 2025, Saudi Arabia executed 1,816 people. 1 in 3 were executed for drug-related offenses, which are offenses that may not be punished by death under international human rights laws and standards, if you believe in those. Foreign nationals made up about 75% of those executions, and that included Pakistanis, Syrians, Jordanians, Yemenis, Egyptians, Nigerians, Somalians, Ethiopians, and others. Many of those were moving drugs, but the point still stands, regardless of how you feel about Saudi Arabia executing people. They believe in their laws so strongly, it doesn't matter if you're from that country or not. You are subject to their law the moment you set your foot on their soil. The Olympic athlete from the United States, I forget her name. That would be professional WNBA athlete and 3-time Olympic gold medalist, Brittany Griner, who went to Russia and had possession of marijuana. She was arrested. We ended up trading her for the arms dealer. and it was a terrible deal for the United States. But when you go around the world and you violate other people's laws, no one is really surprised when there are consequences. But in the United States, we have such a degree of tolerance, such a degree of acceptance, that our laws very rarely get into the morally prescriptive. Really, they only deter harm from one human being to another. You can't hurt someone. You can't kill someone. You can't steal another person's property. But there are no laws about modesty. There are no laws about what substances you can and cannot use. Hey there, me again. I realize that point sort of sounds like I forgot about the laws banning consumption of methamphetamines, for example. My point was more that there's not a moral prescription for why you should not consume substances. The idea behind banning meth is that people will die if they consume meth, and the law is concerned with preservation of life, not about moral integrity. If it was about moral integrity, there would be more concern for the legalization of marijuana. Uh, the law is designed to be sort of a playpen. You know, you can do whatever you want inside your playpen. You can't go outside. Um, so yeah, I realize that what I said kind of sounds dumb if you just hear it on its face, but my my idea behind it was more that we don't ban things from moral reasons. We ban them for safety reasons, and that's a big difference between us and other countries. So yeah. There are no laws about observance of religious festivals. It is a fundamentally open and welcoming place, and that gets taken advantage of. The nationalist perspective would remember that the United States was founded on Christianity, Christian laws, Christian values, Christian beliefs. And we have systematically opened up our laws, but it wasn't always the case. There used to be a far more of a religious essence to our laws, especially before the colonies incorporated into the federal government. Some of the colonies, especially the ones that had more of a tradition in Puritanism, were far stricter about observance of Sundays, or about modesty, or about alcohol. Uh, we've moved away from that, but we've reached a point in our history where it seems like it's no longer possible to have both. The world will continue to push for more and more debauchery, more degeneracy. The applications of technology seem to be always pushing for more vice, more of the thing that makes human nature wicked. The uh, the upsides of AI are not they're not that great compared to the downsides. The push for legalization of substances continues to go downhill. What started with tobacco and alcohol becomes marijuana, and then it becomes amphetamines, or it becomes Ozempic. All the while, companies pushing for profit would rather sell out the well being of their customers, or the American people, in exchange for profit. The entertainment industries, they've always been a bit gross. But recently, in the past, 25 years, have dabbled a whole lot more in the profane, the outright disgusting, for sensationalism, but also because at their core, human beings have an appetite for evil. And our laws, originally designed to prevent that, or to get in the way of profiteering off of evil, have been pared back. The heart and soul of the United States is Christianity. We were built and founded on Christian values. Our laws were and are, well, should be fundamentally Christian. When Jesus was asked what the two most important commandments are, or what the most important commandment is, he said it was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second one after that was to love your neighbor. And those laws are essentially a more condensed version of the Ten Commandments. About half the Ten Commandments, I think the first four, are just about loving God. About half of them are about loving God. The other half are about loving your neighbor. And those themselves were a more condensed version of the laws given to the Israelites in Leviticus and Numbers. In that way, the complexity of the law was distilled, and also the impetus was given that it doesn't matter about observance of the letter of the law. What matters is the spirit of the law. In the same way, in the United States, most of our laws, which come from that same tradition, are modeled after the Ten Commandments. In the United States, it's illegal to kill. It is illegal to steal, to murder, to perjure yourself. But there are no laws in the United States which prevent blasphemy, or there are no laws that protect against the corruption of religion. I think it would be a good idea when things come to a head and when we do begin reforming to include in the preamble of the Constitution a copy of the Nicene Creed, or at the very least to enshrine Christianity as the religion of the United States, not a compulsory religion that everyone must observe, in the same way that if we made our official language English, that doesn't require that you be able to speak English or else you'll be cast out. But it does mean if you'd like to do business, if you'd like to move around, if you'd like to engage with the country at all, you must be able to speak English. In the same way, if you want to understand our laws, if you want to participate in our government, if you'd like to help manipulate the fabric of society, you must be fluent and understand Christianity. And not just that, but you must affirm it. You must champion Christianity. You must love the idea of Christianity. You must love the idea of following the Ten Commandments. Your heart must be in the right place, where you don't want to follow the world and the path to your own destruction. It is a blessing that the United States is as open as it is. Many people enjoy the ability to live in America without having to compromise much of who they are. Similarly to religion, in the past, when you emigrated to the United States, you were required, one, to learn English, two, to renounce ties to the country that you came from, and three, to pass a citizenship test. In the past, it meant far more to become an American than it does now. The point was assimilation. If you bring in so many people so fast and you assimilate them, or you don't assimilate them, chaos begins to unfold. Whereas in the past, when immigration was a bit of a slower process, we didn't bring in as many people. We still brought in plenty of immigrants. The United States is fundamentally a country of immigrants, but it is also fundamentally a country of European Christian immigrants. The original Anglo-Saxons, then the Italians and the Irish, the Dutch, the Germans, the English. Most of the original stock of our country was European, and all of them were Christian. Not every single person may have believed in Christianity or had a great relationship with their God, but they all understood that if you're playing for the team, then you're playing for Christianity. And in times since, the process of immigration and assimilation was structured to try and maintain that, to try and keep that. But As time has gone on, we have dismantled and gotten rid of that assimilation process. And we never tried to protect Christianity in the United States. Another issue is the idea of the separation of church and state, which was never a law or written into the Constitution. It was mentioned in a letter by Benjamin Franklin. And the idea of the separation of church and state was that we would keep the United States from becoming like Italy or like the Holy Roman Empire, where the Pope has such a control over what happens in the government. Or we would avoid becoming like England, where the king also happens to be the head of the church. The idea was that the church would remain separated from the government in terms of function, but in terms of soul, they would be one and the same. The government would be peopled by the church. The people in the government would be the same people that go to church, that understand the church, that affirm Christian faith and beliefs. The separation of church and state did not mean we would have an atheist government. It just meant we would not have a government church. And that's misconstrued often now. It's used by atheists and by seditionists as an excuse for the expression of atheism or other religious beliefs. Companies count it a virtue to be tolerant or diverse, to include as many faiths as possible, and they try to include that in our government as well. We should never have a law that gets in the way of the observance of someone else's faith. But that's backwards. No country survives on atheism. When the French tried to create a church of science, it failed so miserably because there is no substance there. There is no soul. There is no spirit. In the same way, if you go to a country that has a very strict religious background, if you go to any seriously religious Muslim practicing country and you expect that you're going to be able to live out a secular atheist lifestyle, you're wrong. If you go to Israel and you try to work on Sundays, you're going to be treated very badly because they have a religious system that prevents people from working on the Sabbath. But in the United States, it's not that way, and that's to our detriment. To summarize the issue of Christianity from a nationalist perspective, our founders came to the continent from a Christian Europe. They were seeking to create a more beautiful Christian nation, not a super inclusive utopia with freedom for every religion. Although by the power of Christian love and our dedication to uprightness, we have managed to create such a society. Our laws are fundamentally Christian. They come from Christian texts. American civil liberties are inspired by Christian philosophy. The Magna Carta and English common law are the byproduct of Christianity and its tradition, the Christian thinkers, the fathers of the Christian philosophy, Aquinas, Augustine. The fact that we are able to enjoy such a tolerant and free society is because of Christianity, not in spite of it. And to say that the United States it should be atheist in its laws and its government is beyond mind-numbingly shallow. But for nationalism to be effective, for a real American nationalist party or movement to be effective, it must acknowledge that ours is a uniquely Christian nation in a way that many others are not. It must acknowledge that we can't be a theocracy, because if you understand Christianity, you know that since the first coming of Christ, God doesn't speak to us in the same way. We couldn't be a theocracy. We don't receive messages from God like that anymore. And more than that, a theocracy would violate our American principles. On top of that, we have a country that is rooted in a tradition of individualism and self reliance. We're not the kind of people that have any history of a monarchy or a theocracy. In fact, our birth came from eschewing a monarchy. American nationalism must be powered by both religion and tradition, but we can't get those mixed up. We must have religion because that is the foundation of this country, but we must have tradition because our tradition informs how we practice Christianity. This is a country founded on American, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, individualist Christian traditions. And freedom of religion must be contextualized properly. It meant that no denomination of Christianity should control the government. But this still means Christianity. Freedom of theologically sound Christian practice. That means more than Jehovah's Witnesses, more than Mormons. This means Christians that affirm the Nicene Creed. Freedom of religion does not mean moral universalism. It doesn't mean Sharia law. It doesn't mean atheism. It doesn't mean abortion. It doesn't mean human sacrifice. It doesn't mean pornography. It doesn't mean the rampant pursuit of worldly pleasures, the monetization of human vice. It does not mean cultural tolerance. It means the affirmation of those moral and philosophical principles that come from the tradition of Christianity. Nationalism must run, it must race to return to the heart of those principles and to restore them, to restore the heart and soul of this nation. Religion is an essential building block of nationalism. It must not be forgotten, and it must be done right. Christianity is the very foundation of this country, and it must be the very foundation of its restoration. Thanks for listening. See you again next week.